Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bock. Today's October 19, 2022, and I'm here for a coronavirus conversation with you. Please join the conversation. Feel free to contact me through the comment section and so forth. I'm going to try to zip around a little bit. I have no guests here tonight, not even my dog. He seems to have had enough of coronavirus, as had many of us perhaps. What's new and different? Well, I went to the ballet last weekend, the Boston Ballet at the Boston Opera House, and it's not my thing really, but somebody had an empty seat, free ticket, so I went along, and it's culture. I had some interest, I had some observations, partly of the crowd. It's Boston's partly Brahmin, kind of upper crust, but mixed in with upper crust from other ethnicities and so forth, not just the Anglo-Saxon Protestants and so forth. But there's kind of a Harvard strain at the ballet, based in clothing and attitude and education style and whatnot. I mean, I could be misreading the room, but this was for this type of event far less masked than most I've been to of this type, which is kind of leans upper class, wealthy, and here Democrat. So I got a few pictures I would show. I think a lot of our institutions have been hollowed out by the endless fear and the fear mongering and the fear generation. I think that this has been done with a purpose. I was at my one of my clubs, my squash and tennis club, and I was listening to two very erudite, educated guys after their tennis game talk about one of set of their of one of their parents. Both of them had COVID just now, and neither one's sick, but they had to go through the whole kind of rigmarole. Got prescribed Paxlovid, and the concerned son, bright guy, was asking the doctor, my dad doesn't really have any, he's 91, but he doesn't really have any symptoms from this. Why is he taking this? And the doctor's like, well, yeah, you have a good point, maybe not. Because, he said there could be side effects from the medication, and why undertake that if he's not having any illness? He's 91 years old. He's not sick at all. So how bad a thing is this? I'm sure he's had all his shots and so forth. I mentioned my recent article. I'll show it to you here, to my friend. And because I was saying that, I'll get to it actually in a second, but I was saying that, that Omicron is not, genetically part of the ancestral COVID, and even the early, alpha, beta, delta strains, all that kind of stuff, related to SARS-CoV-2, the original COVID-19, the bad guy that kind of upset the world and so forth. And he was shocked. He's like, what are you talking about? He hadn't heard this at all. He says, not related? I said, well, everything's related. It's a coronavirus. And, all coronaviruses are related. I mean, all of us are related. We're all humans. We have similarities genetically and whatnot between each other, but it's not a lineal descendant from ancestry. He was shocked by this. Well, how could it be? How could it exist? And I had to kind of backtrack. And a lot of this in my article, and I think I've shown it here before, but I'll just kind of go through this briefly. So is it time to accept, this is from the Daily Skeptic, September 25, from this guy, me, Dr. Randall Bock, is it time to accept that Omicron is not COVID-19? Really, it's not SARS-CoV-2, but I'm using these terms interchangeably as people do. And so just in the locker room, I went over this slide, which I'll expand a little bit for you. The ancestral versions over here, the second wave variants over here, the number of mutations between one and the other, or differences. And Omicron's, kind of like Pluto. If this is, I don't know, Earth, and this is maybe Mars and Jupiter or something like that, it's pretty far out. This is from, he's like, is this one of your conspiracy theories? And I have to say, I took a little umbrage at that. What do you mean, one of my conspiracy theories? I mean, he knows that politically we're, kind of a little bit on opposite sides, perhaps. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, why don't you just look at it first before you try to, cast aspersion or ad hominem attacks and so forth about me or the article? I'm just quoting other people. I'm formulating this stuff or by putting the pieces together, but these are jigsaw pieces that were built by somebody else. So just, getting back, Omicron is not really clearly related to the others. It's put on this chart as if it's somewhat related, but there's been no connection genomically or genetically between these. This is Emma Hodcroft's PhD. She works at Next Strain, which does these mappings. She said Omicron is almost like an orphan without close relatives on the COVID-19 tree. The interviewer explains, in her words, basically, its genes just look so different from the other COVID-19 genome sequences. And she puts it on this, chart with the, COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 bunch, but there's really no evidence that it is part of this. And further on, just to kind of stick with pictures, Omicron's much less dangerous. And historically, I've mentioned this before, that coronaviruses represent number 2 known cause of the common cold. So I'm just going to come back away from that for now. But he was really kind of stunned, and so I said conversely in an email I wrote to him later. I said, as far as conspiracy theories, I mean, conspiracy literally means to breathe together. I actually thought it meant something to do with piracy, but it's conspiracy, like spirometer, respire, expire, and so forth. Excuse me, not expire, but I guess respire, respiration. So it means to breathe together. And so it's kind of an interesting and ironic term for a conspiracy that has to do with the respiratory illness. But I think, I said the real conspiracy might be the fact that you have not heard this. And everyone's been pushing, this is the most transmissible. Omicron's the most transmissible, which is true. It's transmissible because it's mild. Everyone's been pushing that narrative. And nobody's told you that this is not related to SARS-CoV-2. And he's like, why is that? It's like, well, it's because of the E in the EUA, the emergency part of the emergency use authorization. And that is just kind of a nice kind of Wizard of Ozian umbrella, I'm mixing metaphors, that keeps everything together, that we can kind of keep pumping out new rules and restrictions potentially, and have them, government kind of swoop in when it needs to, take a war footing against your own personal freedoms when it desires. And it's also a necessary part to have vaccines trotted out without safety trials in advance. So this new bivalent, I've railed against previously, and people have asked me about whether they should take it. I can't tell anybody whether they should or shouldn't take it. I can say this, though, that there are 2 ingredients in it, and one is for something that's no longer around and no longer will be, and will never be coming back, the SARS-CoV-2. People pretty much on Earth are vaccinated and or naturally immune from it, and it's not circulating at all. So there's that, which is pointless because it has its own danger profile. It's probably in and of itself 25 times more dangerous than the standard flu shot as far as side effects. And we've heard of, these cardiomyopathies and issues with younger people. And the other part is useful if Omicron were dangerous. So making a vaccine against Omicron, I'm not necessarily against that per se. And maybe some people could take that by itself as a univalent, but it would never have been produced as a univalent if they didn't have the emergency part. So they basically have to stick the ancestral, useless, antiquated part of the vaccine, the COVID-19 part, in with the Omicron part, so that they could get through the regulations under the emergency part, as if it's still COVID-19. So that's the real conspiracy, which is keeping the COVID-19 word around, keeping SARS-CoV-2 around when Omicron is a complete break. So that gets back to the title of my story here. Is it time to accept that Omicron is not COVID-19? And yes, we're frankly long past that. It should have been done last December when everyone knew everything that I'm writing here. So the real mystery is partly this, and partly why your information providers, whether it's the government, news, professors, the institutions that we have not brought this up, and it has to be, again, if you want to call it a conspiracy, please do so. So, my concluding paragraph is whether governments had valid reason to bring fear in 2020 is arguable. There's no reason for that in 2022. The EUA, emergency use authorization, as the gift that keeps on giving, prevents any turning of the page from COVID-19 to Corona 22, or whatever you want to call the new one. There's no reasonable or legitimate public safety purpose to behave as if COVID-19 is still the major threat in 2022, nor that the COVID-19 vaccine is necessary. Moreover, this bivalent Omicron vaccine fulfills no genuine patient need. Historically, the common cold, such as Omicron and whatnot, has never been pre-vaccinated. And vaccinated after you've already gotten Omicron, which frankly most everybody has, it has its own potential negative effects. It's called ADE, antibody dependent enhancement, and it has minimal positive effects because people who haven't gotten Omicron, they're not going to get that sick with it either. And the COVID-19 portion has no medicinal, only legal purpose for existing as the second ingredient. So, I think this is the take-home message. You can go back and read the rest of it. Pfizer is doing well by this. And just as a kind of tongue-in-cheek maneuver, I actually wore, Dr. Fauci has made, I think, $15 million. I mean, you can look up the numbers on this. You've been locked down. You've seen that. They've seen the thing. My parents went to Cabo San Lucas, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. I mean, Dr. Fauci, all you got was this lousy lockdown, diminishment of your rights, your kids stifled back, losing a couple of years of their, fertile mind, education opportunities. People lost their jobs. The economy's gone to the crapper and all that kind of stuff. And all you've gotten is what? I mean, all he's gotten, in the meanwhile, he got this $15 million from basically pandering to pharma and using this sleight of hand, this EUA as a blanket that's working 2 years out. I think he was very instrumental in keeping the fear on, so that there would have to be mail-in ballots and all these other kind of electoral reforms and distortions. And so, probably more than anybody, he was successful in getting rid of the erstwhile president, Mr. Trump. But so what have I gotten? I mean, I'm wearing this tie just as a joke. If you look up closely, you might see there's this is something I got from Pfizer probably about, 25 years ago, when Viagra was relatively new. And so I'm on the take too from Pfizer. I just want to point that out. I have actually two of these ties. And so I thought I'd wear it tonight. I'm not sure it actually works with the shirt ensemble, but so like Dr. Fauci have this, and Dr. Fauci and I have this in common. He's gotten something from Pfizer, and probably some more, around the bend as he, joins the board or gets speaking fees. And I got this tie. So on that level, we are on a par. So let's just kind of zip around the world. That's the me stuff. And frankly, I think there's some useful information there. I think you should try to share this article and tweet about it and do whatever you can to put it out there. Something that continues to fascinate me is let's see, where is it? I mean, I just look up zero COVID now and then. So on Twitter feed, if you just put in zero COVID, you'll see some of the world's reactions to COVID. You should not make zero COVID. So here's, as part of China's zero tolerance COVID policy, they now have these isolation boxes at airports. If you test positive, they place you in one and take you away to a quarantine camp. Maybe you get a little bit of rest and so forth. And I don't know if I showed pictures of the quarantine camps before. They look, I hate to, this is an exaggeration. They look Auschwitzian, or like Bergen-Belsen or something like that, because they're just lines and lines of barracks. And I'm sure you get fed. I'm sure you live. It's not quite the same. Here's, I guess, from, I believe, England, the Chancellor at Exchequer gleefully praising China's ruthlessly authoritarian zero COVID strategy. So this is a thing where somehow you're going to beat back, basically the common cold. Good luck with that. So I don't know what to say. You just got to be aware of it and keep your sanity. This is a Substack that I came upon recently. I know Abir, and she has done some excellent work here in making the complicated more simple by putting together memes. So I recommend you look at and join her Substack, which I can put a link to later. But you see her name here. And the PCR test, you can go through these. I've talked about some of these now. I mean, I think we see this evident with Omicron, that it does show positive as a corona test, and there are false positives, and you could be like completely not infected. But there's a second point which is not in this slide, which is that you might have Omicron, which is kind of common cold like, and still turn positive on the so-called COVID test. This is the corona family, and this is I like this because this actually speaks to my article. One of the cousins is a common cold, and there's Daddy Corona SARS, 2003. I might have done this differently. The example I use all the time is the Baldwins, where the more dangerous version, say, Alec Baldwin might be, SARS-CoV-2. He's a nice little kid here, and then I have I do the Stephen Baldwin, Alec Baldwin, Billy Baldwin on it. So if you don't want Alec Baldwin to show up because he might shoot somebody, he's the dangerous one. But right now we're on kind of Haley Baldwin, which I suppose would be this one over here, and she would basically be the Omicron version, the common cold version. So I like that, but I might change it a little bit. So she has some nice memes that I think that you can look at and possibly share. And she talks about, I think speaks to masking and whether we need to do that. And so these are really nice. I think these can be very useful as explanations for people who don't quite get this. And again, it was kind of shocking because the guys I was talking to are, have graduate degrees and very smart people, and they were completely taken aback by my mention that Omicron is not SARS-CoV-2. And the stuff's all out there, but people just don't get information. So it's really incumbent upon you to try to push that narrative. So here's my day at the ballet, and maybe just go over these. This is just kind of in the hallway. I was talking about Harvard-ish. I mean, I don't know if he went to Harvard or not, and so forth. But it's it's a moneyed, educated, literate crowd, and yet they are working on this is nonsensical. It's a big open space. Nobody's sick, and Omicron is not dangerous. It's not SARS-CoV-2. He has not read my article, I'm sure. And we saw young kids, beautifully dressed, nice schools, private schools, all that kind of stuff, and kind of masked. These young ladies over here, I mean, I kind of get this. She's got maybe 2 or 3 masks on. She's got the N95. I don't know. Is that enjoyable to watch the show? The Boston Opera House has huge ceilings. Nobody's sick. These people are not sniffling. They're not, and a lot of people wearing masks anyway. Do they need to wear them? I'm sure they've had triple, quadruple zip and zap, lots of jabs and vaccines and whatnot. They're welcome to do it. I just don't think it necessarily makes any sense. Part of the pandemic, the aftershock of the pandemic, is that there are a lot of empty seats. So, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how many of these, come out to, but the place is probably about half full from what I could see. I didn't see downstairs as much. So our civic institutions have taken a toll from this. And again, these people online, young people over here and whatnot, I don't think there's any real need for this. I'm going to move along, get away from my stuff. In the news, just to kind of keep you up with some things. Maybe I'll come back to this. But there was this has been making the news. Boston University researchers testing of a lab-made version of COVID gets government scrutiny, and I guess what they were doing is trying to put an Omicron spike protein on the original ancestral, more dangerous SARS-CoV-2. This is literally gain of function um, research. There's a guy, Mark Lipsitch, I believe he's at Harvard in epidemiology. You can look him up on Twitter. And he's got a series of tweets, which I've merged on Thread Reader, which you should too. And go over this. He makes some interesting points. They're pretty esoteric points. I'm not going to go over them, but basically, this is standard gain of function. BU says it's not, but they're lying about it. I mean, this is literally what gain of function is. I don't know if they should be doing it, whether they should be doing it. I personally don't think it's necessarily dangerous. I think that even whatever the spike protein is, people have immunity to the ancestral version. It's not necessarily going to get around. If having the Omicron spike does not make it's not what makes Omicron hugely transmissible. It's the fact that Omicron is mild that makes it transmissible. And the more dangerous viruses are not as transmissible because people get sick and they don't get up and sneeze on somebody else as much. What else? So this is another article, Daily Mail. This is playing with fire, could spark a lab-generated pandemic. I think this is a little bit hyperbolic. I don't think necessarily this is going to be the case, but it's something to look at. And this is what they did. Why are they doing it? Because they have money and you don't. I just don't think there's necessarily any purpose to this. I think they should leave the mice and the rats alone and move on with their lives and try to do something else fruitful. Ancestral, SARS-CoV-2 is not coming back unless there's an outbreak from a lab 10, 15 years hence. This is an article I have not had a chance to verify, but a whistleblower associated with Dr. Daszak at EcoHealth, you might remember this from some of our earlier episodes, speaks that COVID-19 was created in the Wuhan lab. I'm going to kind of leave that aside for now. I don't think there's necessarily much dispute about that, although it has not reached common knowledge as well. A couple other articles I might just touch on briefly before I call it a day. One is by Ari Schulman a couple of weeks ago. A necessary backlash to the pandemic regime led its participants to dark places. COVIDianism is dead, the branch Covidians. Americans have moved on from pandemic restrictions. Dr. Fauci is retiring. The CDC lies prostrate. The last pockets of masking and distancing fighters have been exiled to exotic reaches of blue jungles. That is actually where that's right here, by the way, Boston. And all around us, we see wins for those who raged against the pandemic machine. Anger over school closures brought Glenn Youngkin. We'll see what happens next month in November, so forth. I think it's a little bit like the Ukraine war. My son does an excellent podcast called the Pravdcast, based on Pravda. So it starts Pravd, then CAST. You can find it wherever you find your podcast. And it's been fascinating following his podcast and unfortunately the war itself. But Russia had huge gains initially, and then it by all intents and purposes, theoretically they'd go steamroll Ukraine, which is smaller, less sophisticated militarily at the time. But that didn't happen because Ukraine actually built a defense that worked towards the most dangerous aspects of the Russian invasion. And in a sense, this is how your immune system works with a dangerous threat. And the threat gets less dangerous over time. Russia is less dangerous as an invading force to Ukraine than it was previously. And this is because the virus of the Russian military is the virus. It changes over time, and people's reaction to it changes over time. So the Ukraine has far better pinpoint accuracy, basically like antibodies against the Russian military apparatus than it did before against specific Russian units and types of weapons because it understands them better. So it's like a war, and I don't know where that one ends up. You can always look stupid making predictions, so I won't. But that war was taken on in a different way. It was taken on in the form of lockdowns and all these kind of secondary aspects, which were above and beyond what people needed. So I think we have to keep that in mind and stay vigilant. Please let me know how I can improve this coronavirus conversation and future ones, and let me know how you can be part as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to call it a night, I guess. And